section on Children and Youth YouTube page. Finally, please fill out the survey that pops up at the end of this webinar and let us know if you'd be interested in joining a learning community addressing today's topic area. As a reminder, your certificate, link to the presentation, and a copy of the slides will be emailed out within the next few business days. This webinar may go over by a few minutes for questions, and if you need to leave at the hour and can't stay for questions, you will still receive a certificate. If you are calling in, please email me, Jen Croft, at JENN.CROFT@tn.gov to let me know if you'll need a certificate. We thank the Tennessee chapter of the National Association of Social Workers for providing CEUs for this event. We will, of course, email attendees this live webinar following the presentation. And we thank Building Strong Brains Tennessee for sponsoring the event. If you're interested in receiving notice of future BSB Lunch and Learn opportunities, just email me again and I will make sure to add you to the list. So now I get the pleasure of introducing you to our wonderful speaker, Dr. Marva Lewis. Dr. Lewis really is a friend to Tennessee and has come here in person before coronavirus several times to present at a variety of conferences. And for those of you who have not seen her, you are in for a real treat today. Dr. Lewis earned a PhD in sociocultural psychology and is an associate professor at Tulane University School of Social Work with a clinical appointment in the Institute of Infant and Early Childhood Mental Health. Her research studies emotional attunement during African-American mother-daughter hair combing interaction. She developed culturally valid community-based interventions to strengthen attachment and address intergenerational legacies of the historical trauma of slavery and acceptance or rejection of children based on their skin color. Her book, Therapeutic Cultural Routines to Build Family Relationships, Talk, Touch, Listen While Combing Hair, will be released in 2021. Yay! Let us know if we can pre-order that. She serves on the National 0 to 3 Advisory Board and as a consultant with the Safe Baby Court team on reducing racial disparities bias in child welfare systems. In 2020, she will present a webinar series titled Psychosocial Tools to Advance Race Equity for Families of Color in the Child Welfare System. So without further ado, welcome, Dr. Lewis. We can't wait to hear your presentation.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Jen. And thank you, Serena, for your assistance. I want to thank all of you who are here on this call, sharing this time today for us to begin to address these issues of equity and social justice for children, for young children specifically. Also want to say hello to my dear friends and colleagues there in Tennessee, Barbara Turnage, Vicki Harden, and Mindy Cronenberg. Before we begin, I'd like us to just take one moment, just to a moment of silence in memory of the two leaders in the fight for social justice, and that's Congressman John Lewis and civil rights fighter C.T. Vivian. If we could just take one moment. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Today, we are going to focus on how racial disparities specifically hurt young children and how we can use culture to begin to heal from these wounds of racial trauma. We're living in extraordinary times, as you all know today, between COVID-19, the fight for racial justice that is going on now in all areas of the country and the world in response to the killing of George Floyd, actually makes my heart sing to know that so many people are out there, so many people are now aware of these issues related to justice and disparities and racism and the well-being of these young children. Today I'm going to focus on how the impact of the legacies of one trauma that we don't often talk about, that we are now beginning that conversation, and that's the trauma, the legacies of the historical trauma of slavery, the modern legacy of that historical trauma of structural racism, and what is the impact on children of color and their families in the child welfare system. I'm going to also share with you, those of you who've heard me speak before, I am going to share with you the research I've been doing on the hair combing task as a way to strengthen relationships. And then we're going to describe, I guess I should read these learning objectives. Oh, first, analyze race as a relational trauma. That's a big take-home message. If you don't think about anything else from this talk, I want you to think about race and trauma, and then I want you to think about race and relationships. Those are the two conceptual frameworks that really drive all the work that I do. If we could have the next slide. So race as trauma, race and relationship, and our focus today on children. Every child is learning that race matters and race hurts children. I want you to look at the list video. This is a little 2-minute video clip you can see on the web. If we could have this video now. When we discuss race, I don't know, Serena, if the video is up. It should.
Serena, is it popping up?
It's a live link in the, there it goes.
There we go.
Okay.
So for everyone on the call, please turn your volume up on your computer.
Okay. When we talk about race, we're talking about trauma. And children are learning these messages from us about race every day. Some of you on the call may recall in the 1950s, Kenneth Clark and Mamie Clark did that original doll study that you just saw, replicated in Italian. They did that with African-American children before the Brown versus the State Board of Topeka Supreme Court decision that desegregated schools. That study, the findings from that study those findings were used in part to demonstrate that children were suffering from being in segregated schools. Now, there's a whole lot of information now since that study's been done. But the point I wanted to make has to do with color and colorism and the fact that that study was replicated by CNN 50 years later, and they had the same results. And then we see this video, if we could go to the next slide. So how do we begin to build justice for these children? How do we take to heart to do no harm to children in our interactions with them, with families of color? And these three areas, for me, are the framework, again, to help us to reduce disparities in child welfare, to build equity, and to make beautiful communities. Number one, children remember. Children remember when race is framed as trauma, we begin to focus on the hurt of racial disparities in the child welfare system for these young children of color. Two, culture heals. When we think about the culture we are born into, the culture of our family, the culture of our heritage, what my charge to all of you is to begin to think about what cultural tools, what strengths are built into cultural groups that we can then build on to achieve justice, to achieve safety for children if we're in child welfare, if we can begin to prevent child abuse, prevent the hurts that are occurring to children based on their racial group membership. And finally, community connects. We know there's just an enormous amount of research demonstrating that social support, social connections is one of the best tools that any group that begins to remedy all types of things. And we are all living it right now in our isolation with social isolation. But social support and community, it helps families to parent children. It helps teachers to teach children as we, again, are learning from our current circumstances. Community connects. If we can go to the next slide. So I would like you all to share in the chat box, what are your fears and worries about race? Many times as I do this work around the country, people will say, very good, well-meaning people, they'll say, I'm not a racist, I'm a good person, and we are all good people in any number of ways. But then our fears and worries interrupt us, and it stops us from doing the jobs that we've been trained to do. Sometimes when I speak with clinical psychologists, I say they get clinical amnesia, or social workers or counselors, they get this amnesia. I don't know what to do. In the face of color. We see color and we freeze. We see color in our brains. That amygdala part of our brain, it triggers this fight or flight response or freeze. So if you could just share some of those fears and worries, and we'll talk about them throughout the short time that we have together today. If we could go to the next slide. Here are some of the fears and worries that were shared in workshops that I've done before with other early childhood educators. Some of the fears are, I don't want to offend people. I don't want to offend you all either. And that actually stopped me at one point from having the courage to even use the phrase structural racism. That was one of my fears. I've been doing this work since 1981 and realized that some terms, some words would actually shut down the conversation. You say racism, oh, I'm not a racist, we're not going to chat about this. But that was one of my fears, that I realize now that we can't have a conversation if there's certain words that we can't talk about. Some of the worries, I just don't know how to bring up the topic of race. And it is, and it's a highly volatile topic with lots of intense emotions associated with it. So how do we begin to bring up something that is so taboo? There's not a lot of recipes for how do we talk about race. Many of us who went through our educational system where race wasn't discussed, slavery wasn't discussed in some textbooks in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s even in 68 when I was in high school. We were marching around Ferndale High School. This is in Detroit, Michigan. Right outside of Detroit, Michigan. And we were marching saying we were demanding. Detroit was burning, the whole city, the whole country at that point, too, was going through a lot of protest and unrest. And our groups, we were teenagers, we were marching saying we wanted Black studies at the time. Anxiety. They won't believe me. They'll see my white skin, or they'll see my black skin, or they'll see my head wrap, and they won't believe me. They won't believe me that I'm really here to help. They won't accept that I am a good person. And then some people said, no, I'm not worried about anything, nothing. I hadn't thought about it. That's a privilege not to think about race. That's a privilege to wake up every morning and not have to think about whether or not how I will talk to my children about the police violence that's going on right now. I see you all are still putting in some of the chats. So I'm going to, if Jen could read some of them to me, I'm going to, and I'll try to address some of these fears and worries. Maybe read about 3 or 4, because if there's 100 folks on, we can't. But I will attempt to respond to the fears and worries throughout, or reference some of these fears and worries. Or you can put in the chat box as I go through some of the slides that, I have a question about this. I want to encourage you all to share questions as I go.
Yeah. Okay. So a few of those that have popped up, Dr. Lewis, is one that says that my children will internalize who the country world tells them that they are. A second is that my children, sorry.
I'm trying to write down. Okay, go on.
The second is my children and grandchild could be killed just because they're Black.
Yeah.
Another is my implicit bias will override. Oh, just went away. I'm so sorry. Let me go to another one. Oh, yes. My implicit bias will override my goals of trying to be fully present with the person in front of me. And many more powerful statements. Yep. Those are just a few. Yep.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. Thank you for those. And I will attempt to, as I said, reference several of these questions in the chat box as we go along. I'm going to first start off with us differentiating between these concepts of race, culture, and ethnicity. The slide you see in front of you is the dearest friend I have in the world. We went to graduate school together. That's Kim. She's given me permission to tell her family story and her story as it relates to race. So Kim is from Trinidad. Her father is Chinese. Her mother is Trinidadian, is African Trinidadian. I don't know. I can't remember now what words she uses to describe themselves. She was raised Catholic. They were practicing Catholics in Trinidad. She immigrated to this country in her early 20s. I think she was 21, and married Manuel. Now, Manuel is not in the picture. Manuel, his mother was European American, and his father was Mexican American. Manuel and Kim had Joshua, who you see in the picture. He's the young man to the left. Well, it's my left. I guess it's your right. So Manuel and Kim had Josh. Josh is now a mixture of European American, Mexican American, Trinidadian, and Chinese. Kim and Manuel divorced, and Kim then married Ola, who is in the picture. Ola immigrated here from Nigeria, speaks Igbo, and his religion is Muslim. They then gave birth to Kimmy, who is in the picture, the little girl in the picture. So this is a true multicultural, multi-ethnic family. And in the United States of America today, the largest, fastest growing population or demographic population are multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic families, such as Kim's family. If I was I was trying to think of, if I was a guardian ad litem, or I was a social worker or a therapist or a lawyer or home visitor, and I wanted to understand family relationships, I wanted to understand what husband-wife relationships were like. What's the culture? What's the Trinidadian beliefs about what is the role of a mother? What is the role of a child? Should children be seen and not heard? What is it? What do Nigerians believe about work? And what do Nigerians believe about women working outside of the home, or husbands working outside of the home, or the expression of emotions in a family? These are cultural values, beliefs. Culture gives meaning to family relationships. Culture provides a guideline for how Kim should behave with Ola, how Kim should behave with Josh, how Kim should behave with Kimmy. This is what culture does. It gives meaning to your everyday life. Traditions, beliefs, culture is learned. Culture, you're born into a culture. Everyone on this call was born into a cultural group, speaking a specific language with specific values associated with that language, and they were socialized into that group. So could you go to the next slide? In the United States of America, this family is categorized as Black. That's their racial group category, each one of them. Look how much information is lost about this family when we only address Black. We only address racial group membership. Now, this whole webinar is about race, and it is about their experiences as members of a racial group. And yes, Ola has been stopped because of his color. Josh has been stopped by the police because of his color. Kimmy has been ignored in her classrooms at Harvard University. She's now 22 years old, and she's at Harvard University. And she talks about her experiences in the classroom in very, very progressive areas. If we could go to the next slide. My point is that we as a country have inherited this phenomenon called structural racism, where racism, I'm even choking on the word, racism is incorporated into all areas of our life. Sometimes I use a slide that shows the framework of a house. Structural racism is embedded in our everyday lives, our everyday interactions, our relationships, whether or not we can, where we live, where we go to school, where what our doctor is, who our teachers are. We can tie it back to structural racism, the structure, the policies. And those of you who are on the call, please, one of the things I want you to do is look at your policies that perpetuate structural racism. So in this context, we have white privilege, we have contemporary culture. I can't read that slide very well. But my point is that there's structures that are manifested at every level of in our communities, in our lives. And then we have ongoing racial inequalities. Many of us, we may not recognize the inequities. We may not recognize disparities. We may not recognize racism. I did not recognize slavery as an experience of trauma until about maybe 14 years ago. Slavery, and I didn't think about it as an experience of trauma. I was not educated that way. I was educated to think about slavery as a source of shame. We used to say, why did those African folks let themselves be captured and brought over here to this country? That's what I was thinking before the Civil Rights Movement. When the Civil Rights Movement, I was 16 in the 60s. So we then began to be Black and proud. But then we still had to fight, as John Lewis says, and his life has shown us that we have to continue to fight to begin to dismantle this structure. We could go to the next slide. We could go to the next slide. Thank you. In child welfare, structural racism impacts and hurts young children. They have longer stays in foster care. Each of these bullets, there's a whole line of research, there's a whole line of statistics, there's a whole line of slides, not slides, but charts I could have shown you to simply support this idea that structural racism leads to structural inequality, leads to the disparities that show up in our various systems, whether or not it's our nursing system, our hospital systems. Right now, I was listening to NPR, and you see me going, oh my God, because this current pandemic is causing a lot of stress. Is everyone going to have equal access to the vaccine when we discover it? Fauci is working real hard now, and the CDC, everyone's working hard to get the vaccine. But will we have equal access to that vaccine? So in child welfare, in this system that children become invisibilized in, there are fewer positive outcomes, less likelihood for reunification, more likelihood for these children to age out of foster care. We could go to the next slide. Racism impacts parent-child attachment relationships. One of the, again, manifestations of structural racism, structural inequality, disparities, has to do with parenting. And parenting, one of you in the chat box says, I'm afraid my child will be killed. Kim and I wrote an article about that. Kim and I wrote an article about the fact in 2017 in California, she has a third child now with Ola, and his name is Adjorn. Adjorn is a little African American boy with skin color, dark skin color, the color of my skin color. And when the radio news said another African American boy had been killed in California by the police, this is in 2017, Adjorn's reaction was, Mom, am I safe here? The person who asked, I'm afraid. Yes, African American parents are, and parents of color, Latinx parents, parents who have children who are different, parents who have children with disabilities, parents who have children who represent a number of diversity criteria in our current, and not maybe I won't say current, I'm going to be hopeful, but our past, our yesterday, our structure, the structure is one that privileges one group and doesn't see the other groups, or invisibilizes the other groups, or attaches stereotypes to the other. And it then begins to impact our interactions. Walter Gilliam, and he's at Yale University, he's done this study that's fun. He's a white male. He and I did this workshop together, and it was great. Oh, well, actually, we were in Tennessee, I think, when we did that workshop together. I can't remember. But my point is that he's done research now demonstrating that daycare providers, with this implicit bias, you were saying you were, the one person was talking about, worried about their implicit bias, will cover their ability to see. And yes, it's there. Implicit bias, Walter Gilliam demonstrated, leads to currently, well, not currently, the babies aren't in daycare right now, but has led to a disproportionately high rate of expulsion for 2-year-old Black boys. They're more likely to be expelled from daycare. And we talk about how can I parent go back to work? You know, right now the whole big conversation is about let's go back to work. We open up the school so that parents can go back to work. These children are being expelled from daycare, in part because implicit bias, stereotypes that have been ingrained in our brains. So all our this Lunch and Learn series will be addressing some of those issues about how our brain triggers bias responses. This bias response is leading to things like children being expelled, leading to police shootings. Now, I put this picture that you see on the screen right now, this police officer, and I can't read it right now, but this was from, I don't know, I did this, I don't know when, I don't know if it shows. This wasn't last week. This wasn't last month. This was several years ago that I had pulled this picture up to talk about police shootings. It may have been in 17. But my point is that you can go to the next slide. That children are witnessing. Children will internalize who they are. That first little video clip, that's the risk. They don't have to. My message to that person who said that my fear and worry is that children are going to believe what people say about them, this is the work that I did in 93, 94 with Joy Osowski. When I came to New Orleans, I'm in New Orleans, Louisiana right now. I came here from graduate school to the project director for the Children and Violence Intervention Project, our goal was to educate police officers about how witnessing violence was traumatic for young children, very young children. At the time, this is in '93, New Orleans was the murder capital of the world. So we first wanted to, and my job was to develop a curriculum about how being exposed to violence impacts young children. So I said, first we need to find out what children, we met with the police and everything, and they said that, oh, these children don't trust us. These children, they just don't trust us. So they don't look to us they wouldn't look to us for help. So anyway, we designed some surveys. I'm telling you this long story. We designed some surveys just to be able to document for the police that what children felt about them. Do children trust police officers or don't they trust police officers? Do they feel hope or do they feel hopeless? So in administering that survey, and as you see the logistics, 248 African-American children, I think it was about 3 different schools, 4, maybe 3 or 4 different schools in New Orleans. So I wanted to do a warm-up activity with them just to get them ready, prepared. These are 3rd and 4th graders, I think, and just to get them prepared to complete the surveys. So I said, draw me a picture. Draw a picture of your neighborhood. Then I said, draw me a picture of what goes on in your neighborhood. 2 pictures. I had like 500 pictures after that little warm-up activity. And over 60% of those children drew pictures, acts of violence. If you could go to the next slide. If you could go to the next slide, please. So this is just one of the pictures. They saw bullets, bystanders, children dying. These babies, and this is what I call them at this time, these young children, again, they were witnessing the violence. This is what they were seeing in real life. This wasn't on the TV. This was what they were seeing in real life. And we developed some coding systems. I worked with I worked with some other psychologists, and we developed a coding system for coding the content of these pictures. One of the codes was inappropriate affect, or incongruent, not inappropriate, but incongruent affect, which is what you're seeing on this slide. These children are smiling. A little girl has a cigarette hanging out of her mouth, and I'm going to kill you, she says as you smile. Maybe not. There's that ambivalence. So these babies drew these pictures, and I sent these pictures to Bill Clinton at the time. He was president at the time. And because one of the children who were in the study that we did, his name was James Darby. You can Google it. James Darby, he drew one of these pictures, and I don't have his picture on this group of pictures. But James Darby drew one of these pictures. James Darby was killed on Mother's Day in 1990. I can't remember what year, but he predicted his own death. Anyway, when they got done drawing his pictures, I had said, you all write a letter to President Clinton and tell him he better do something about all this violence in the city. And James Darby wrote in his letter, people are shooting here. President Clinton, please do something about this. Anyway, the letter got to President Clinton. Then James Darby got killed. And then James Darby's mom went and met with President Clinton. This was 1993, and even when I say that, I'm going, oh, my God, here we are in 2020 with this same conversation. Please go to the next slide. What we need to do now, those of you who are familiar with the adverse childhood experiences, I think this your group is focused on ACEs. ACEs, there's 4 urban ACEs that aren't often addressed in literature on ACEs. And the 4 urban ACEs are witnessing violence, living in unsafe neighborhoods, experiencing racism, living in foster care, and experiencing bullying. The Philadelphia Urban ACE study in 2013 used the original ACE measure with these new questions that address the issue of race-based violence. This slide, excuse me. This slide, I wanted to just put this context of parenting in an urban environment. Parenting where, again, the person who was saying, I'm afraid for my baby. Racial socialization is where parents of color prepare their children to live in this context, cities, neighborhoods, where they will be targeted for violence. I have a whole ton of resources and video clips that I'm happy to share with you all. I think in the beginning, Jen said that I'm doing this race equity seminar series for the 0 to 3 National Safe Babies Court Teams. And so at the end of each webinar, I'm giving a whole ton of resources, and I'm happy to share these resources for parents, resources for you to how to talk about race. One of you, again, I was sharing with you, one of the questions that often comes up is I don't know how to bring up the topic of race. How do I talk about race without my biases interfering? So I've written an article, a 2019 article. Again, I'm happy to share with you, Mothering While Black, Strengths and Vulnerabilities in a Socio-Political Racial Context of Structural Inequality. So this article was, it just came out last year. 2 years ago now, 19, however many years ago it was. But that article talks about this slide, how as a mother, and you're in a targeted, racially oppressed group, excuse me, provides a whole another degree of ACEs. I always say ACE plus. ACE plus is ACE plus historical trauma of whatever group you might identify with. ACE plus is if I'm a LGBT. One of my research assistants is trying to re-educate me now about how to refer to various folks. I'm stumbling, but whenever your identity group, your social identity group, we're going to do a whole workshop on that topic. Biases that come along with that, as well as traumas that are associated with that. If we can go to the next slide. The traumas that are associated with our various identity groups. So race-based psychological experiences of parents in the child welfare system. So do no harm. That's the title of this workshop. Do no harm. Think about the fact that when same race or different race, and when I say same race, you can be a black social worker and have a black client. You could be a white social worker, have a white client, white social worker with a black client. Same race, different race. Going back to that, I don't want you to go back to that slide, but I'd go all the way back to that structural inequality, structural racism. Those are psychological experiences that are triggered. Skin color, and you can jot this down in your notes. Skin color is a trauma trigger. Then I want you to also think about these race-based psychological experiences of children, of the parents and families in the child welfare system or the system that you are serving. Grief and loss and complicated bereavement. Back in March, when the COVID first came, when we first sheltered in place, I was just overwhelmed with the grief. I'm African American. I'm a direct descendant of enslaved African Americans, and I'm dark skinned. And I have some of my best friends are white. Some of my best friends I have a multicultural set of friends and relationships. But in March, when people started dying from the COVID, they were African Americans. My choir members, I had 4 of my choir members pass. 4 of my choir members test positive. My best friend who lives in St. John's Parish here in New Orleans, that was one of the hot spots. One family had 14 people in the family network die from the COVID. It was overwhelming. And the complicated grief and loss that is on top of the structural violence, the structural inequalities, the structural disparities that people of color, families of color, parents, and the children, which is what our focus on, are experiencing. That's a level of complication that boggles my mind. As a helper, as a provider, all I want you to do is to begin to think about it. It's a little bit more complicated than I can no longer go to my school, or I can no longer, I lost, my brother died. It's very complicated at this point. And I don't want us to be afraid. We're talking about our fears and worries. And if we can become stuck. You heard me. You hear me. Start stuttering when we begin to talk about some of these realities of living in a racially stratified society. Stratified along color, where dark colors, colorism is true all over the world, but dark colors is at the bottom, light and white is at the top in many, many, many groups around the world. If you're in India and you're a Brahmin, you're more likely to be lighter skin color. And if your caste is the lowest caste member, you're more likely to be darker skin color. I did this talk in Russia, Moldova, Russia. People told me their experiences of colorism in Russia. Peru, I'm in Peru. People tell me their stories of colorism in Peru related to skin color. Racism equals stress equals trauma, and it leads to post-traumatic stress disorder. Joy DeGruyer, she's a author who has written a book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. The APA. The American Psychological Association has recently, in 2016, identified racism-based stress as trauma. The American Pediatric Association is now recently, in 2019, recognized that racial stress impacts young children. Some of us are on the call, me included, are saying, okay, they recognize this now. So stereotype threat, Lisa Molex is a psychologist here at Tulane, and she does work identifying how just the threat of being categorized based on your race, categorized based on the size of your lips or your nose, simple categorization, the threat of a thinking that can impact your function and how you function. If you can go to the next slide. Let me just, I want to internalize oppression. Let's get into this first question. Will my children internalize it? Yes, they may internalize what other people say about who you are, good hair, bad hair, nappy hair. This is the work that I do now, that Barbara Turnage and I and Leslie Diaz, and we did this work on hair combing, and I don't think I'm going to have enough time to talk to you at length about it, but go to the next slide, please. Who is responsible? With a committed interdisciplinary group is needed. I want to really challenge each of you to identify one or two other folks to address these issues. This is not work that we need to do alone by ourselves. This work of undoing structural racism, promoting social justice, even to do no harm, we need to do that as a collective. If we could go to the next slide. So do no harm. Leverage your individual privileges, leverages your individual power to first document the disparities of racism. Document the disparities that the people who you serve, the families who you serve, the children who you are in your classrooms or in your virtual classrooms. Document what disparities are they experiencing? What disparities related to race are they trying to overcome or trying to address? When the COVID hit, all the computers, not all the computers, but, we're trying to figure out how do we have virtual learning. And what was one of the first things that happened? Some schools got computers, at least here in New Orleans, all the schools got computers. But if you don't know how to use the computer, if you don't have good Wi-Fi connectivity, it's no good. Not know how to use a computer. I'm not saying that, but even Serena's on the call with me, and I get when I get stressed. How do I use this? How do I touch this button? How do I bring up this PowerPoint? How do I do this? How do I do that? That's what happened with me, and I'm saying that maybe that's what happened to many people who may or may not be used to using technology to teach from. I dropped out of school, and now you want me to teach my child. Work for equity, we need to sustain justice. I was so happy to see all the various folks out there who were out there marching for racial justice in the face of the killing of George Floyd. And I was like, we have to sustain it. We have to sustain leveraging our privilege, leveraging our power in our various areas of work. And then we can prevent child abuse, and we can begin to build healthy communities that we all can enjoy. So my approach is, at the beginning, I wanted to emphasize, and I continue to emphasize, that race is about relationships. And we can use a relationship-based, racially informed, racially traumatically informed approach in child welfare with the children that we serve. We can go to the next slide. I'm going to kind of go quickly through these next slides. So you can begin to work on racial equity, and it's what I'm calling champion teams, race equity champion team. And there's tools that I think I got the chat box keeps flashing on my screen and covering up this slide, but the chat box is saying that I think you all are sharing some tools. There's a number of different tools out there now. I'm so excited to share. There's a racial healing book that has all kinds of exercises and workbooks. Anyway, I can share any number of tools and resources now. The champion model. I'm gonna just be a coach and a booster for those of you who volunteer to be champions of racial equity, to help work through some of the lessons that we've learned in trying to roll out this equity model. If we can go to the next slide. So Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart is a social worker who, I think she's at Boston University. She developed, I first read her chapter on, not Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, but I first read her work about trauma and Native American trauma boarding schools. That was when I first started understanding and thinking about slavery as trauma. But she has been working in the area of trauma with Native American populations for years now, decades now, and she had noticed in her practice, she's a clinical social worker, she noticed in her practice that some of the Lakota survivors of Wounded Knee, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee in Oklahoma, I think it's in Oklahoma, they were coming in showing an array of symptoms. This is a long, long story. But anyway, she identified what she called Wakisiyapi, memorial people, who carried the historical trauma over 6-7 generations, that they could pass down the trauma generation after generation, and they carried it as a way of memorializing what had happened to their people, to the Lakota people who had been murdered by, I think it was George Custer. So anyway, she's a direct descendant of Sitting Bull. But anyway, you can read, again, her practice offers a wonderful framework for enlisting culture as a way to heal from historical trauma, from the group to heal. We can go to the next slide. The group can heal using culture, and she calls that using rituals, routines, and reconnecting with our cultural identities. So rituals involve symbolic communication, and it solidifies this is who we are as a family, or it says this is who we are as a group. This is the good, the bad, and the ugly about who we are as a cultural group. As an American right now, I'm an American, and there are a lot of things that I am not proud of as an American. There's a lot of things that I am proud of as an American right now. I just retook a course on the Constitution, and I see the Constitution now in a whole different, with whole different lens now. The framers, yes, they owned slaves. Yes, the Constitution wasn't meant for all of us in America, but they had a dream, and that vision is still there that we can now operationalize. Again, back to the COVID and the pandemic and the fight for racial justice that's going on right now, and some of the hopelessness that was expressed by some people saying, oh my God, we're still fighting the same fight that John Lewis is fighting. And he just died, and C.T. Vivian, they were fighting. But one person said to me, she said, we are now in a second reconstruction of America. That gave me hope. That excited me. After the Civil War, there was a reconstruction. Then there was Jim Crow. Then there was the development of the birth of a white supremacy nation. And now we're in a second era of second reconstruction that we all can contribute to. And I'm going to go on to the next slide. And I'm not going to go through all the rest of the slides, but we can create new rituals and celebrations to release our lost ones. We can add cultural heritage to life books of children in foster care. How many of the life books, that was a tool. I was in child welfare for 12 years in Michigan. And those life books, they didn't have anything in there about culture. That was in the 80s and the 70s. But now we can incorporate culture into these life books, in family books, as we help these children who have been removed from their families, placed and separated from their neighborhoods, to help them understand who they are, where they come from, and what their experience is. Maybe they're 3, maybe they're 2, maybe they're 1, but we can create life books that those foster parents can then hand to those children when they become of age. I adopted my daughter, and I met her birth mother, but I wanted her to know who her birth mother was. We had a semi-closed adoption. So my point is that sharing that information for me was a gift I gave to the birth mother, was a gift she gave to me to allow me to share information about that family with my daughter. Now that she's an adult, my daughter's 24 years old right now. We can go to the next slide real quick. And I realize that I know that Jenna said that we were going to go over a little bit of time and questions. I'm going to tell you one slide about my research, which I love. So my research is on the hair combing task. If you can go to the next slide. It's about attachment and the conceptual framework of hair combing interaction. Go to the next slide. Where does child learn acceptance? They learn it from lots of different people. Go to the next slide. They learn it from a lot of different people because historical memory is a silent participant in everyday interaction. Go to the next slide. So, and I'm trying to get to this other slide, but I'm not going to get there, y'all. But this is another study I had done with a group in, I don't know, back in the early, 96, 97, African-American moms. And they had internalized oppression. And when they internalized oppression, you can see these statistics. They saw themselves as less warm and more aggressive toward their children. They saw themselves as more neglectful toward their children. This is a mother. These are mothers who have self-rating themselves So go to the next slide. So my goal was, how can we interrupt these intergenerational messages related to acceptance or rejection of children based on their skin colors? Those mothers who saw themselves as ugly, like we saw in the very first video, they internalized those messages. What my goal now is to interrupt those messages using the hair combing task, so that baby, when her mother combs her hair, she won't be hitting her and saying, you got some ugly nappy hair and ugly dark skin. Go to the next slide. Fathers comb hair. I have this beautiful video. I wanted to show you these fathers. Do we have time, Jen? Can I just show one of the hair combing videos?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's show one of them. So fathers come here. Let's show that one video of the mother of the Danielle, and she's given me permission to show this video. This was not a person in the research, but I want to show you this video. If you can, Serena, can you put it up real quick? So here, let's do the fathers first. This is just a minute. If you all can bear with me for 4 minutes, these videos are 2-minute clips, but it'll allow me to talk about what? Talk, touch, and listen. And what do they have to do, Serena? Do they have to mute their mics or? Serena?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, just if everyone can turn their audio up on your computer, they should be able to hear it.
I'm going to talk through it a little bit. No, you can keep going. Let the video keep going up, because I just want to talk through it a little bit. They can't hear me? Is that what it is, Serena?
They can hear you, yes, ma'am.
So I argue hair combing interaction, combing hair is a time to bond, to connect with children. Children learn lessons about who they are as a little girl, about who you are as a father. And you see a lot of emotion goes on. That's the research that I've been doing. Talk, touch, and listen. Verbal interaction occurs. Physical touch, look at how he touches. And you can tell stories to your child while that child is getting her hair combed. Hair combing on average with the type of hair that African Americans have takes on average maybe, you have to comb hair every day. And I'm saying let's use that time as an opportunity to connect with young children. And these fathers, as you're seeing, are connecting with their children in a lot of different ways. A lot of different things go on. You can do verbal interaction. You can turn the music down, okay? Verbal interaction, physical touch, reinforce. You can reinforce attitudes. You can undo some of this racism. You can undo some of the harm that's done to young children when they see around the world that people who are dark, people who are darker skinned, people who have curly, coily hair are treated differently. They don't have as many resources. That's why the little children chose that doll, the white doll. The white doll has the resources. The black doll doesn't have the resources. I want to be like the white doll. We can go to that next video real quickly. This is that second video. I just wanted to show you both of these. That video is on YouTube. Somebody sent it to me, and I was so happy they did, because fathers comb hair. And when I do the talks about the hair combing research, the fathers raise their hand, and I comb my daughter's hair. And they do. So if we could go to that last little video. And,
hey, Dr. Lewis, I think we only had 2 videos from you, so in the links you sent. So I think those are the only 2 we have. Serena, is that right?
Oh, well, okay. Well, it's embedded in that PowerPoint. So maybe you can just go to the next slide, and I'll tell you when you get to it. Keep going. And if not, then I'm just going to I'll answer some of the questions. If you go to the next slide, if we can bring it up, fine. If not, fine. But I'll answer some of the questions in these last few minutes that we have. There it is. See if it'll work, Serena. I love this video too. So if it doesn't, if you click on it, it should work. If it doesn't, then we'll keep going. Anyway, this is not working. Okay. So talking, touching, and listening. Go on to the next slide. Go on gender and racial identity. Go on to the next slide. So it just flipped through the next slide because this is showing the results of the research. I wanted to do research to keep going to demonstrate that their tenderheadedness, for those of you who are not familiar with tenderheadedness, you can stay there just for a hot minute. It's a reactivity to the scalp. And if you are the mom's trying to comb or dad's trying to comb their child's hair or grandma's trying to comb hair and that child's very reactive to the touch, then they're going to have a hard time conducting that activity. Keep going to the next slide. I'm going to do, 4,380 opportunities to talk, touch, and listen. I'm promoting positive attitudes toward hair combing. That's a path to begin to undo the trauma of the historical trauma of slavery. Go to the next slide. It's the interaction. It's not the styling. Keep going, keep going. I love this next picture, which is Obama letting this little boy touch his hair, and he's connecting. He shows the connection. Go to the next slide. And then, that's the dad comes here. Keep going to the next slide. So it provides a no-cost opportunity for parents in community. I'm saying again that we need to address the issues of racial inequities in collective groups. Don't send a parent to a school to fight with the school board or fight with the teacher. That parent needs to go as a collective. We can keep going to the next slide. That parent or you as an educator needs to find allies in either the parents or the community allies in terms of trying to undo policies that harm children, like teachers can't hug children, teachers can't touch children. Those are policies that I say can harm at this point. And I was in child protection services, and I know all about sexual abuse, and I know all about predators, and I know all about all the awful things that some adults do with children. But I know all the wonderful things that we need to do that children look to us to do. We can go to the next slide. So I'm going to end on this slide. Well, maybe I won't end on this slide. I love this slide because this is showing a group of parents and the talk, touch, and listen. We had parent whispers. We had agency people there. You see it's a multicultural group of families, people who are coming together. This was an 8-week parent intervention, and I'm happy to share the curriculum with you. I'll go to the next slide. But it's all about colorism and hair. And we use videotape feedback to talk about strengths of community, gives feedback to others. Going to the next slide. I am rushing through this so fast. And some of you are saying, don't go so fast. But I know you're interested in it, and I'm happy. Keep going to the next slide, though. I'm going to get to the last one so that they can. San Francisco, they're using this curriculum in San Francisco with Talk, Touch, and Listen with Latina moms. Go to the next slide. That's the group in California. If you can go to the next slide. We use a parent cafe and a puppet show to talk about a little girl who doesn't want to get her hair combed. Go to the next slide. And again, we're building community. We're using cultural ways to build communities and provide social support. Go to the next slide. So when I did the talk in Israel, and one of the students heard me doing the talk about hair combing, she took it back to this group, her community of Ethiopian refugees who were all living in separate areas of Israel at that point. They had been airlifted from Africa, and she had them get together and comb hair as a way to connect. And she sent me the picture of that community combing hair. Okay, go to the next slide. Please forgive me. So we can advance equity to nurture the future of children of color. You're going to get this whole PowerPoint, but I want you to take action, use your psychosocial tools to add teams to create anti-racist policies that nurture the well-being of all children, the families, the community, and you, their helpers. Okay. You can go to that last slide that just puts my, Here I keep saying, oh, this is the end. I love this is one of the drawings. Children have hope. This is one of those drawings. And when they drew hope, that's what we can build on, is the hope that children have for their future. And we can, this was back in 93, the child drew this, or 95. Okay, you can go on to the next slide. Life is difficult. This is from M. Scott Peck. And working to undo racism, working to dismantle structural racism is absolutely difficult. But because once we accept that difficulty, the fact that it's difficult, it no longer matters. We'll just work. We'll keep working. We'll keep working, as John Lewis showed us. We keep working at it. Keep going to that last slide. So be a champion for justice, please. And please, on the last slide is my email address. And I am happy to share with you resources, answer questions. I'm available.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lewis. I feel like everybody is saying that we could listen to you talk for hours because you are phenomenal. You are so authentic and real. And there was one comment that I wanted to share, which was your passion, enthusiasm, and research are phenomenal. And so we've just gotten so many responses like that. Again, I want to remind folks that if you're available to stick around for questions, Dr. Lewis has graciously said that she would stay a little bit longer to answer those. Before we move to that, though, I want to correct a pretty big oversight that I had at the very beginning of the presentation, which was I failed to thank the Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services and their SOCAT team for helping sponsor this presentation. This would not be possible without them, and so we are so, so grateful for our partnership with SOCAT. So, Serena, I think, are you going to be navigating the questions? I think you've been keeping up with them, and will you read them all out for the benefit of Dr. Lewis and those that are going to be watching this recording?
Let's see. Steph and Travis asked, the schools where they live teaches Indians instead of Native Americans, and they use Native logos, but they will not express why. What can we do to set the record straight besides constantly correcting folks? And this is from the teachers. It's got to change. Do you have any ideas?
So what can we do? I'm a teacher, and you're saying, what can I do in my school setting to correct folks? Have you tried? Has she tried? Read it to me again.
They correct, yes. They correct.
She corrects all the
Standing
time.
Rock. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Why does she think, this may be a better question for me to ask, because my first question would be, why do you think that they're continuing to practice? People hold on to practices for reasons. Sometimes it has to do with fear, and they don't want to see certain things. I mean, it took this whole protest for the Washington Redskins now to change their name, and that conversation's been going on for probably decades, but now they're about to do it. So I would, Stanley Sue, he uses this phrase, enlightened self-interest. So I'll say to this teacher, if they can help whoever the powers that be whoever it is that they're correcting, I'm not sure if they're talking about their principal or other teachers or other people, who are they correcting? Tell them they will be in their enlightened self-interest. Stanley Sue is a psychologist who wrote that book about microaggressions. It's a great book. Again, there's a lot of wonderful resources. But if you can help them see what their enlightened self-interest, I wouldn't argue with them. I wouldn't, and we do have a little bit of strategy around how do we begin to talk with folks who have totally opposing viewpoints. I believe in abortion. You don't believe in abortion. I'm an atheist. But you're a Christian. Any number of differences that we have that are real difficult to talk with. So that's a long answer, and I hope I gave her just one suggestion: enlightened self-interest. Help together figure out how it would be in their enlightened self-interest to begin to change the nomenclature, change those naming practices, change those signs on the wall, change those pictures on the wall, change the policies. Enlightened self-interest, Stanley Sue, S-U-E, is a psychologist who wrote that book. Okay?
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Someone asked, can you speak to why disparities exist? The move from slavery to Jim Crow to mass incarceration and poverty. Some people think that Black people have somehow caused their own problems.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a real common pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Why, if immigrants came here from Ireland and Italy and every country in the world, people have immigrated to this country. My friends I showed you at the beginning, they immigrated here from Africa, from Trinidad, and Kim's making $1 million now. I'm not, but she's, they're very successful. Ola has his own business. Why is it that some folks are successful and some folks aren't? I have to always refer you back to 13. That's a video you can look at if you want to look at a video that talks about structural racism by Ava. I can't think of her name right now. She did that work on Selma. The whole idea about why are ask me the question again so I can make sure I'm answering it specifically because I'm going off on all these tangents. Ask me the question again. Say it again.
Sure. Can you speak to why disparities exist?
Why disparities exist? Okay, I'm going to stop there.
Yeah.
Stop there. Why disparities exist? If you think about, I don't know where you live in Tennessee, but the practice of redlining, look that up. Redlining is a practice where mortgages were not given to certain groups of people, and it turned out to be Black people or people of color. So neighborhoods were circumscribed as to who would be financed to purchase a home. In this country, purchasing a home and land is one of the best ways to pass on your wealth to the next generation. The GI Bill, there's a whole number of practices and policies that privilege one group in one generation. My great-grandparents, they couldn't own land. My great-great-grandparents couldn't own land. And if they couldn't own land and they had to be sharecroppers on the land, they accumulated debt, and they didn't have wealth. And then the next generation then didn't have wealth and didn't have education. And that's, I'm giving you a real quick thumbnail sketch. But just think about, even in your own family, whoever you are, we all have some level of privileges. My mother and father were teenage dropouts. They dropped out of high school. They had 8 children in Detroit, Michigan. And I'm seeing how structural racism relegated them to only live in Royal Oak Township, 8 Mile Road, not the 8 Mile Road that Eminem, the white rapper, lived. I lived in Royal Oak Township where the Black folks were relegated. There was only one spot we could live in. My teachers, my elementary school principal, he had a PhD. Now, he had a PhD because of segregation and he couldn't get a job at other places. So my point is that structures are policies, practices, and traditions that benefit one whole generation. They can't pass on those privileges, or they're restrained from passing on those privileges and wealth accrual to that next generation, and so their children then suffer. The children who are currently in public schools right now where there's few resources, they don't get a practice test on the SAT so they can go to Harvard or they can go to Stanford University. There's structural inequalities that exist that provide challenges for parents in each generation. That was a very, very short answer to a question that can take and should take a whole semester to respond to. So I don't want you to feel like I still don't understand. It's a complicated response, and it's a complicated system that we live in. So my answer to you is to keep asking the question, keep trying to understand, why is it that Blacks aren't succeeding? Why is it that these children in my classroom, the parents aren't coming to the parent-teacher conferences? Why is it? Why is it? Why is it? Put race and trauma in that question mark, and then think about what does it have to do with racial trauma. I'm Black, they're Black. Why aren't they coming to my classroom? Okay, keep going. With this next question, I'm just trying
Sure.
to. I see it's 12:20. Okay, go on.
How about one more question, and then we'll conclude for the day. Can you give us some ideas about how to facilitate healing through culture in the context of child welfare, where kids have been removed from their primary cultures?
Yes, that one slide I put up about that life book is a wonderful way to at least preserve some of the cultural heritage that that child has experienced. So one group of social workers in, I can't remember what state it's in, but one thing you can do to begin to is to participate in cultural events as a group or with foster parents, to have not for it to be a show and tell type of thing, but one thing that, okay, here's a really good idea that you can do very easily, is have a group of people from various cultural groups come together over food. You can do I call it a cultural potluck, or we call it culture chop. That's what we call it. And so I have people bring, you have this group of people, 4 or 5 people, give them all the same ingredients: cabbage, rice, chicken, and I don't know, some other ingredient, beans. Just give them the same 4 ingredients. Tell them to make a dish, and it can be at a foster parent's meeting, but make a dish made out of the same 4 ingredients, and then they come and they tell their story about their cultural group and how their cultural group makes beans and rice, or makes cabbage and rice, or cabbage and beans, or noodles. Actually, it was noodles. That was the 4th ingredient. But I'm glad to send you that little exercise. There's several different little, we call them cultural icebreakers, that you can use as a way to begin to talk about culture and not race, or talk about race and the racial harms and privileges and not freeze up. So again, I'm happy to share with anyone. You can email me. I respond to that mlewis@tulane.edu. Maybe the next day, but I'll still respond and share tools, techniques, address different questions, or lead you to other resources, which is one of the things that 0 to 3 has a whole array of resources we're trying to put together to address issues of culture, race, and ethnicity, and to reduce what can be done to reduce racial disparities. Thank you all so much, everyone who stayed on this call a little bit longer. Again, I apologize for rushing through these 50 million slides. I didn't think I would do that, but I did. And I'm just happy that you all are interested in this topic and willing to share your time. Okay.
Dr. Lewis, thank you. Thank you. You have been so gracious and so lovely as usual. A reminder, there's 206 people who stayed with us through this extra time. So that really speaks to the interest. Reminder to folks that this webinar will be recorded. We'll be sending out the link as well as the certificates. And Dr. Lewis has given us permission to share the slide deck, so we will share that as well. We'll also tap her for some of those resources that she thought would be useful. Everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you for the next event.
Thank you, Dr.
Lewis.
Thanks to everyone so much.
Mm-hmm. And Serena and Jen, are we going to stay a little bit afterwards?
You know what, Serena, would there be a way that we could open another private WebEx, and sometimes there are attendees that stay on?
Absolutely.
So maybe we wait a few minutes for participants to dwindle down, make sure there's no other complications. And then, Serena, if you would email us the link for a little private debrief.
Okay, I don't know if I can, I'll leave this meeting.
Yep, that's right. All right, Serena, I'm going to leave the meeting too, and we'll be on the lookout for your invite.
Sounds great.